So it is my pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Ben Walker. Ben is a partner with Kearney, and Kearney is a global management consulting firm with a passion for focus in the aerospace and defense industry. Ben has over 15 years of industry and consulting experience focusing primarily on operations strategy, growth strategy, and major transformations. He has helped both the DoD and commercial clients drive results through transforming operations and supply chains, business strategies, and product designs. Ben lives in Roanoke, Virginia with his family. Recurring theme you're going to hear. Ben is also a Hokie who graduated in 2010 with his BS in mechanical engineering and holds a 2013 MBA from University of North Carolina. Please join me in welcoming Ben to the stage.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to be back here on campus. As a Virginia Tech grad, it's always good to come home here to campus. Although I will say it would have been nice to kick off Clemson week with a win over the weekend, but maybe we won't go there. I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking to you about how we see problems from a consulting perspective. And I'm going to try to simplify things a little bit. I know a lot of you are interested in how it works and the types of problems we solve on. So I'm just going to talk through that a little bit. I will say it's tough to follow Megan. She did a great job up here before, and you guys move things with railroads for a living, and we make slides for a living. And I've got 4 of them, so I guess I'm failing already. So will be good to talk through. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about myself, kind of how I got here, and then just go through a little bit about how we think and give you some examples. So a little bit about me. Tech grad, actually graduated out of engineering, so I am a mechanical engineer. Really wanted to hear about the cooling coming out of the trains, so next time. But came out of engineering, went to Lockheed Martin. They gave me a call and said, "Hey, do you want to come work at the Skunk Works?" I said, "Yeah, sounds great." So I did that for a little while, and then went to business school, and really opened my eyes to just the different types of problems out there. You don't get a lot of background in how the business world works, a lot about finance, the things that you really need in consulting, and I learned a lot about it there. I know the UNC logo is on there, so I was going to make it small for this audience, but disregard. But no, it was a great experience and got me interested in consulting. I learned more, and that's when I found Kearney. Kearney is a global management consulting firm, as Jay said. We have about 6,000 people globally, so we're not huge. We're not one of the big 4, hundreds of thousands of people type thing, but we do exist in the high-value management consulting realm. So we compete with folks like Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, those types of firms out there. Our history is really in strategic operations. So think end-to-end operations, manufacturing, supply chain. We actually started as the same firm with McKinsey about 100 years ago. They broke off and went more toward the strategy side. We went more towards the operations side. And since then have really grown the capability in strategic operations, but I think both of us really rounded out the firm to be able to do everything from end-to-end standpoint. So really proud to be part of it. We were actually named as the #1 consulting firm by Consulting Report for the past 2 years. So really cool accomplishment, really proud of the culture we have here at the firm, and really excited about the problems we get to go solve. So I want to just pose 3 questions for you as you're going out and solving any problem. And it doesn't have to be a consulting problem at all. It could be any problem you're going out there to solve. It could be an assignment you get from CBA, for example. But the first thing you got to do is what problem am I really solving for the client? And we'll talk a little bit about that. It's not always easy to figure that out, but an important question to kind of step back and figure out what that is. Secondly, how can and should I use data and tools to solve the problem I have? So we're going to talk a little bit about how I view using data and tools, and give you guys some examples of how we've employed them. And then third, we're going to talk a little bit about like taking a step back from actually, what we kind of put together and making sure it's the right solution for the client at that time. And, that's really important. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. So I'm going to give just a really basic framework here about how do we figure out what the real problem is. And, this is by no means exhaustive. We're not going into the nth level of detail here, but there's some simple frameworks you can use to think about, like, where in the value chain am I going to go look? We are a hypothesis-driven industry. We take a hypothesis-driven approach to problems. So, using a framework to figure out how we go identify where the problem is really important. So, is it a pricing problem? Is it a portfolio problem? Is it a planning problem? Or we have a problem with manufacturing, a supply chain. These are all very different solutions that come out of these areas, so it's important to figure out before I go spend a bunch of time in an area where I'm actually gonna go look. And then once I've kind of honed in on where I'm going on the supply chain, looking at the people aspect of it, the process aspect of it, and the tools aspect of it is really important. I'll give you guys a couple examples of times when we were brought in where the solution or the problem at hand wasn't exactly all that clear. One example is we came into an aircraft maintenance, repair, overhaul business, and we were brought in because they were missing revenue. And for those of you that have been around business for 5 minutes, missing revenue is a bad thing. If you've committed to one thing and are hitting something vastly lower than that, your investors, your managers, everybody says that's a problem. So we came in and they said, that this was right after COVID, 2022, and they came in and said, it's a people problem. We can't get people in the hangars, we can't train them, they're green, they're terrible at working, all this stuff, like, go look there. So we started looking at it, and kept asking questions of folks. We sat down with people in operations, we sat down with people in engineering. We wanted to take a broad look at the business in general and make sure that's the problem at hand. And what we found was, if you look at the way their programs planned there, everybody planned in their own little silos. So it said, if I'm looking at this plane or this operation, I'm going to create my schedule. I'm going to plan my resources, my people, my equipment, in accordance with what I think is right to go execute this. And historically, that had not been an issue. They had plenty of capacity. But as COVID came in and resources became a problem, we found out that this created these stacks, these self-optimized stacks of resource requirements where they didn't even realize that they needed more people, more equipment, everything than they actually had for particular times, but then it would drop off really sharply. And they had no real way of managing that. So the problem was more in planning than it was in people, in figuring out, how do we bid the right things that we're gonna go work on? How do we structure our work over the course of the year to make sure that our resource levels are balanced? Everybody was running around all over the place trying to fight fires, and it was just not effective. So, that was a key one there. And then, I feel like manufacturing always takes the blame. So anybody here who's worked in manufacturing before? Yeah, you guys always get the blame. Like, if something's not delivered, it's always manufacturing's fault. But, we were brought into another business, made a really cool product for the government. Can't talk a lot about it, but, they were building this really unique product, and they were like, well, we can't get it out of manufacturing. It's an issue with the process. And we actually went and dove into the design of it and found out that they had skipped some really key steps in getting it ready for manufacturing in the first place. Like, the tolerances were too tight, the suppliers couldn't actually make the things that they were asking for. An engineer went and designed something in their cube somewhere in their office, and they're like, well, this is really cool, and I'm going to go pass it off to this next engineer who's going to make this, and it's really cool. And then they designed it, and it worked, and they built it in a lab, and it was great. But then, they didn't realize that the supply chain wasn't actually capable of performing to the things that they made. So, figuring out how do we make the design producible, how do we make the design manufacturable, those are like really important questions that if you go to a company like Apple, like things will never get released without those questions answered. And I've seen it way too many times that they try to rush to get something designed and out the door, and it's just not producible at scale. So just a couple examples of where it's really important to make sure you're solving the right problem at hand. I've seen a lot of teams go and start putting resources toward where they think the problem is, and without actually exploring the different pieces in the system around it to make sure that they're not spending a bunch of time in the wrong area. So let's talk about data for a second. And I think this is an important point. And I was thinking about the message I wanted to give here to this audience at this time. And I just wanted to make a couple points about data. So I'm going to go left to right on this slide and give some examples of why this is important, and just some different tools that are out there and different use cases for them. There's a lot of talk about AI and really cool software and all that stuff, and we'll talk about that, but there is a place for those things. So we're going to start on the left with Excel. Whether you like it or not, Excel still runs most of the world. I mean, it is absolutely the truth. Like, do not discount building skills in Excel. And I put this kind of silly meme up there that somebody shared with me some years ago. It's like an IQ curve. If you recognize it, you recognize it. But there's an IQ curve, and there's a bunch of people in the middle with these cool tools and stuff, and there's like this wizard guy on the right that's using Excel. But if you go work in the banking field, if you go work in, frankly, like supply chain planning, if you go work in a lot of these places, like Excel is a very powerful tool. It's really good for one-time analysis. If you're going to go do it once, you're going to do some desk research. It's quick. It's easy to pull things together. It is limited on data set size. There's a lot of new functionality that's coming in that allows you to do power queries and all those things that are really cool too. But one of the things I do want to emphasize here is from a cross-functional implementation standpoint. Like if I'm going to go into a business and say, use this template or use this thing, the whole organization knows how to use Excel. Like you don't have to the change management aspect of that project is much, much lower. So I wanted to kind of footstep that for a minute. Like if I'm looking at an analyst coming into Kearney, or if I'm looking at even an associate or somebody that's coming in to derive value on a project, I expect a very high level of proficiency in Excel. So don't discount it. Advanced analytics. This is a cool space, and a space that we actually use a lot. When we look at large data sets, things that a lot of our clients can't go prove themselves. We can set up really quick things through AWS or SQL or a lot of those other data warehouse type of places, and try to analyze the information against it using a number of things, whether you're building a dashboard or you're driving analytics off of Python or whatnot. There's some really cool stuff you can do out there. I'll give you a key example of it. We were brought in by the Navy some years ago, 2018, to go look at how do we buy material better for submarines. Seems like it shouldn't be that complicated of a problem. Turns out submarines are really big and complicated, and you don't make very many of them. So we actually went and worked with the Navy, and this is all public information. We went and worked with the Navy to develop minimum viable product in Excel to see if we could actually go and start to predict some of the material requirements. This gets at some of the locomotive things that Norfolk Southern is doing, but instead of having thousands of locomotives, we have like 7 of a type of submarine to go and try to do predictive analytics on, which is a challenge. So we proved it out and started realizing that the number of data sources and the amount of data out there is crazy. If you think about what it takes to maintain a couple $billion submarine out there, it is intense. So we realized that there was just a lack of use of data around the organization and started building an actual analytics capability and planning, which is really cool. If you think about the use cases of it and making sure that the boat can get out on time and making sure it's capable and all those things, and bringing the organization around to trust the data. And I will say that there's a key part about this example that it's great to go build the environment. It's great to go build the tool. It's great to go build the dashboard and all that stuff. But the thing that I am most proud about is the organization came around to a common understanding of the data at hand. I'll say that again. The organization came around to a common understanding of the data at hand. And that is very, very hard to do. There are a lot of places that will say yeah, your analysis is great, but I don't trust the underlying data, or it's bad, or it's messy, or whatever. And having everybody come around and say, yeah, I understand this is what it is and this is what it isn't, is really cool, because then you can start to make decisions. And that is important because it actually enables the organization to use what you just did. And that change management aspect of it is what sets people apart from being able to stand up an IT system to being able to drive impact for an organization. The third one I'll go after is Gen AI. And I do not want to discount the impact that this is having in a lot of places. There are absolutely some really cool use cases for Gen AI and machine learning out there, and they're growing more and more every day. Even our industry is being upset in a lot of places, being able to generate insights out of thin air, essentially, as part of a lot of people are concerned. But you really need to know when you go to implement these things what the use case is going to be and how the organization is going to accept it. If I look at the 3x3 that Megan put up there, I think 10% of the use cases they had out there is 7 out of 70 or something, if I did my math right, that were of the high value, high feasibility range. There is a lot of investment that is required to go in and do this right. There's a lot of cool aspects of it, but you have to be ready to do it in the right way. If I think about some client use cases, they say, great, AI can go do my buying, from a supply chain standpoint. They can go issue purchase orders. They can go look through my resource plan and say, I need a widget on this date, it's just going to go buy it. But what's compliance think about that? That's an important point that, if I look at generating an image online, or some of the things that Google AI has put out recently that are kind of funny, it is not perfect by any means. And how do you go and audit to make sure it's making the right decisions? Those are important questions that you need to answer before you go down that path. But it's got enormous potential if you do it in the right way. The last one is, as organizations come around use of data and using data as a backbone of how they operate, there's been immense progress in the ERP space, the enterprise resource planning space. SAP, Oracle, I could list a dozen of them that come out, various or different industry-specific things. But I've seen a lot of areas where a group has come in that does this, and they say, you need to go put an ERP system in. Or, you don't have good data here, so you need to go change your entire organization. These are massive investments by companies. And you really need to try the first 3 first to prove them out with the existing infrastructure before you go down these paths. I mean, there have been instances where we've come in, we don't do this. We don't implement ERP systems, which is part of the reason we're 6,000 and not 600,000. But we have come in where somebody has created a business case around IT transformation and reinvestment, and we call them like the hockey stick business cases, where it looks like negative, 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 and all of a sudden it's like this massive return at the end. Don't do that, please. I've seen so many of those fall apart. They have to be implemented at the right place and the right time. There is absolutely a place for them, but really making sure the organization is willing to accept it, and at the right time to accept it, to go down that path. And it can be enormously powerful if done right. So I wanted to close with, ultimately this has to be, when you go down these paths, the right solution for this client at this time. When you go down and work a solution, and you're working in a conference room, you're working with the clients, you're visiting them, what makes sense on paper might not actually make sense for them at that time. You have to understand what they're going through as an organization fully. You may only be working with one organization, one piece of the organization, one site, one function, one factory, those different places, but really getting to know your client and understand your client is really important. And say again, really, really important. And it's becoming even more important. And I've seen a lot lately where you show up at a client, they've been working with other folks, or even folks in our firm, where you're working with them remotely, or they're new to get used to, and you just don't build the same level of understanding that you do working with somebody in person. And I want to just emphasize that, get to know your clients, get to know the people you're working with. And I'm saying it as a client because I'm a consultant, I'm used to saying that. But if you're in an organization and you're in industry and you're working with somebody else, go see them. If you're not getting something, go sit on their desk until they give you what you need. And it's really important because maybe you are recommending a major investment in IT or whatever, but did you know that they're also going down a major acquisition path? Did you know they have a huge amount of debt? Did you know they're about to go through a major transformation that's already straining the organization? These are things that you need to know before you recommend something as a consultant, as an expert, as somebody supporting somebody else. And that is really, really important. I keep saying that, but we hold it as a core value of our firm. I put this quote by Andrew Thomas Carney, who was the founder of the firm. It's kind of posted in a lot of places in our office, but we call it essential rightness, which is really making sure that what we're delivering is the right thing for the client, and then being able to communicate it with them to be able to drive the change. And I kind of look back on my time here at Tech, and one of the greatest things I think the engineering program did was drive it into me during the mechanical engineering lab that the communication part was just as important as the lab results. So being able to communicate your results and what you're doing is really, really important. I'm going to end it there and take any questions if there are any out there. Happy to explore different areas of concern, back to the data slides, or just any questions about the industry in general. But thank you. All right.
my wife and I are professors. I'm Mike King. We're professors at George Mason. We have the amazing opportunity to be at the doorstep of consulting world. I mean, it's amazing the number of internships our students get. Why is that important to me? I do teach data science, decision science. Excel is a very important platform that I use. I really do sleep and dream in spreadsheets. My wife thinks I'm weird. So not to put you on the spot, you said you really assume maybe for new hires a high level of Excel experience. Can you give me maybe one example that you would see or maybe pose to a potential intern that if they knew how or she knew how to do that, boom, come on in, or if they don't, you're not ready for Kennery. Thank you.
I mean, I appreciate the question. That's actually very helpful. I'm not going to say there's like one formula or one thing in Excel. I think being able to navigate the tool and understand what it's capable of and not capable of is really important. You know, being able to do index match, do relations between tabs, do pivot tables, power pivots. Those type of things are really important because there's more to a pivot table than just creating it. It's actually understanding how the underlying data comes together in a relational way to drive an actual conclusion. So, being able to do that is important. I think it's less about the tool and more about a basic understanding of like, how do I manipulate and use limited size data sets quickly?
That works. So my name is Jordan. I work in data analytics for a company named Rimkus. And in my role, I very much work as a consultant for internal clients. My group's purpose is pretty much to try to take a proactive approach towards building out new tools, systems, and processes for different groups across our organization. Now, hearkening back to the visual that you had in terms of the steps that an organization goes through, between Excel all the way to sort of that ERP systems. I guess I have two questions in this regard. One is there a necessity for all groups in an organization to follow stepwise through that visual, so everyone is being brought up to the same speed before you move on to the next area, and I think particularly as it pertains to as data is collected and stored, and also, well, let me start there and then I can step to the next one.
Sure. No, appreciate the question, and I think going back to this framework here, it's important to know the problem you're really solving for first. I've seen a lot of people have this, if we build it, they will come mentality to being proactive for analytics solutions, and that becomes very hard from an adoption standpoint. I think from stepping through this, the answer is it depends. I had to use it at least once here. Definitely not. But I would say like the further you are going to the right of this graph, the more you have to be intentional about the change management that comes with it. So very little change management, whole lot of change management. To being able to get the organization to be able to accept what you're doing and have them become proficient and knowledgeable around it.
And then that kind of leads to my second question, which is just about the adoption. So many of the clients that I run into are very used to using Excel, however complex they create their spreadsheets. But to a certain point, it becomes too clunky, and you have to move on to the next step. But for many of these people, they are not accustomed to these new tools, let's say Power BI or Tableau. So how do you work with these individuals to train them, to make them feel confident that they're able to use the tool effectively, and also try to make those who are very rigid to those older ways become more accepting and open to these new tools, and hopefully, turn that into a domino effect of more people wanting to do that?
No, it's a great question. One of the things I will tell you, in an client example that we had to do, we ended up building we call it an interface that a planning community could use to go in and understand how different things were operating and what they needed to go work on. And I think it was in Power BI that we went and built it, but the organization was not ready to accept it. They were very much an Excel organization like you're talking about. And the thing that we had to do was actually go and sit with people and train them through it. And then they had to go manually make all the calculations that they saw on the dashboard in Excel themselves to prove that it worked. So these were all engineers. They're like the engineers. So take that with a grain of salt. But you really need to understand the organization and what they need to prove the new way of working is better than the old way of working. And as soon as you get that, we call it like the WIFM, the what's in it for me. Once you get the what's in it for me right with the organization, adoption is actually pretty easy. Maybe one more?
Yeah, so thank you, Ben. This is a very interesting presentation. And towards the end, you were talking about, I think, your experience in mechanical engineering and how they said, and oh yeah, you need to be a good communicator too, or develop communication skills. And my observation is that, in the world of analytics and quantitative things, we often say those sorts of things. The communication is sort of like an afterthought at the end. I think part of it is because it's easier to teach Excel or Python or whatever, and harder to teach the communication stuff. So I'm wondering if you have any sort of practical suggestions particularly for students who maybe are getting lots and lots of the technical training. What could they be doing to develop and hone the communication skills? And what do you see in terms of the need for communication skills, like early in a career versus to maybe where you are now in your career? How has it changed over time in your professional career?
I'll start with the second piece and come back to the first piece. Communication is always important no matter who you are, period. Like it is about how organizations operate. The only thing that changes is the breadth of the audience that you have to serve. So if you're a junior, you have a very specific place that you normally communicate. As you get more senior, it's, how do I communicate to a board of directors? How do I communicate to investors? How do I communicate to, potentially a massive organization? How do I communicate to interns? Those things are all different, and your message is different, so you have to make sure that you understand how to communicate to all those ones. And I'll close really quickly with actually a helpful framework, I think, for communication. We use a framework called STOKE, S-T-O-K-E. I'm sure others use it, but it's how we frame building a story. Everything is about building a story. It's always a story. There's a start and an end with an instigator, and always a story. But it stands for situation, trigger, overarching question, key points, and evidence. And if you follow that framework to build whatever your message is, it'll be a great starting point. Your situation is your facts at hand, why you're there, the problem you come in, the trigger, what happened? Why were we brought in? What happened? Overarching question, how do I get my profitability better? Or, whatever the hypothesis is that you're driving. And then your key points. More than 3, or at least 3, no more than 5. Like, if you come out with 9, you did it wrong. I promise. And then your supporting evidence is where the data comes in to really support the story you have. So making sure you get the story right and then building it with everything that we just talked about. All right, thank you. You have time for one?
Did somebody have another one?
One more.
Okay.
My name is Yume Mu. I'm from Radford University. My question is, your clients have many years of experience in their industries. So as a consultant, what thinking, what tools, what methods have enabled you to provide actions, suggest recommendations to your clients? Thank you. Could you provide a case? Share a case.
The case would be every single time we show up at a new client site, they're like, I know more than you, I have 30 years of experience, which is true. You know, I will never come into a client and tell them the first day that I know more about their business than they do. That's just not true. But the things that we can do is help frame a problem. We could help take an external look at that problem. I can bring a lot of people in with me from around the firm who have solved this problem before, and in fact solved it well, understand how to change the organization from around it. When you're in a job in industry, you know you have a responsibility to do that job, and there's a lot of things that you have to do to execute that job. When I come in, I have the luxury of coming in to study your organization. And a lot of people in an organization don't have that luxury because you have a job to go execute. So, you know, I have probably done this 100 times, way more than 100 times actually, to go in and actually study an organization for how they operate, and that gives me a different perspective than somebody in industry. And like I said, the person with 30 years of experience in that job knows way more about that job than we do. But it is our job to come in and get as close as we can to your knowledge as fast as we can, right off the bat. But it is something you hear every single time. Cool, I think we're at time. Thanks.